Hi Jamie Lynn, I see that you have your first book out. Now, quick question, is this the first book you've ever written?
Yes.
Great! Congratulations on completing your first big writing project. That is a major accomplishment. Now, has your book been to an editor at all?
I don't know.
Okay, well, that's kind of important. We do want to make sure your book is edited before it hits the shelves.
Why?
Well, you're new at writing, right? Normally you're an actor and a singer, so writing books is kind of a new skill for you.
Who am I to say?
Yeah, that kind of says a lot. And even if you're an experienced writer, every new book needs to go through editing as well. It's important to have a second and even a third set of eyes to make sure each project is at its best. Now, why would you think you don't need an editor?
It's a book about me.
Well, even so, every memoir and every autobiography needs to go through editing too.
Oh my god.
If you'd like, I'd be happy to edit your book right now for you. How does that sound?
Here, take it.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy. Welcome back to my channel, Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business. And today we are going to be going through Jamie Lynn Spears' memoir, Things I Should Have Said, and editing it. Now, the intro skit was kind of a joke. I'm sure that this book did go through at least some type of editing before it was published. This book was published by Worthy Publishing, which according to the copyright page is a subsidiary of Hachette Book Group. So this book went through a Big Five publisher process. I imagine it was edited, but whoever edited it did not do enough, so we're gonna re-edit it together in this video today. Now, before we get too deep into the video, I'd like to introduce myself if you're new to this channel. I'm Savvy. I work as a writer and an editor for multiple different publications. I spent 6 years working in journalism, including working as a writer and an editor for multiple magazines. I've also worked in book publishing where I've edited others' novels, and I've worked in self-publishing as well. I have 11 books out, and I've edited a few books that have now been published for various clients. Since 2016, I've been working as a freelance copy editor as well, so I have lots of experience in the writing, editing, and publishing world. I have a master's degree in writing and publishing where I studied editing as one of the things that I studied as part of that overall degree. And because of that, I'm going to go over a lot of the things that I've learned in my education and in my work experience that could really have been used to make this book a lot better than what it was. Now, before I undertake a massive editing project like this one, it's very important that I am properly fed and hydrated and fueled up to go, which is why I'm really excited about today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Magic Spoon, which is a high-protein, low-carb breakfast cereal with a variety of fun flavors meant to evoke the childhood nostalgia of eating a bowl of cereal while you watch Saturday morning cartoons. As I've been documenting my weightlifting journey over the past 7 months, I've talked a few times about how I'm trying to get more protein into my day. Because I was also trying not to eat so much sugar lately, I'd honestly stopped eating cereal altogether for a while, even though cereal was a food I used to love back in my teenage years and my college years. So I was really excited when Magic Spoon reached out to me because they offered me a cereal that had exactly what I was looking for in terms of extra protein without adding more sugar to my day. Magic Spoon cereals have 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, and only about 140 calories per serving. They're also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. Go ahead and take a look at the link in my description below if you're interested in getting some Magic Spoon cereal. You can go on their site and build your very own variety box and use my code SAVVY to get $5 off. You can choose from the best-selling flavors like cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, cookies and cream, and maple waffle, plus other awesome flavors including blueberry and cinnamon. And as I've mentioned before, guys, the cinnamon one is my favorite one to eat in the morning before I get started with the Your Morning Guru show. Magic Spoon cereal is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, meaning that if you don't like the cereal for any reason at all, they will refund your money, no questions asked. So go ahead and check out the link in my description below where you can use the code SAVVY for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/savvy to save $5 off on your order today. Also, another fun announcement for all of my Canadian and British viewers, Magic Spoon is now also shipping to Canada and to the UK, so that's pretty cool. Thank you again to Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back into it. Additionally, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for continually supporting this channel. My Patreon supporters' names are up on the screen, and if you look in the description below, my Patreon supporters who contribute $5 a month and up have the option to link their own small businesses, social media pages, channels, whatever, so go ahead and check those out as well. Now, let's start editing Things I Should Have Said by Jamie Lynn Spears. So when we look at the process of editing a book, once the book is with the publisher, one of the first stages that the book is going to then go through is called developmental editing. This happens after the book is already in its somewhat final draft. I won't say it's very final draft, but the idea is you write your first draft of a book, right? And then after that, your book should go through beta readers, meaning people that read it and give feedback on it from a reader's perspective. You should potentially have a critique group that you go through it with other writers where they give you feedback. And you should probably write a couple of drafts and take in some feedback before you even submit your book to the publisher. Once your book has been submitted to the publisher will generally have an in-house editor or perhaps a contract editor that they hired if that editor works freelance, that they will then have do developmental edits on your book. And developmental edits are basically the process of getting the book from like its almost final draft to its final draft. So developmental edits are not going to focus on things like grammar and punctuation and typesetting, none of that. That's all going to come later. Developmental editing is going to focus on the storytelling itself. Are there any plot holes in the book? Are there any things that don't make sense? Are there any parts that the author needs to rewrite? The idea being that you probably don't want to go and change up individual sentences or fix individual punctuation if those full sections are going to change to something else anyway. So this is kind of the stage to getting the book to its final draft. So I figured before we go into line edits and copy edits for this book, let's try doing a developmental edit on this book and talk about how this book wasn't really ready. This doesn't feel like a final draft that was ready to be published. When I worked as a creative writing teacher for kids, one of the things that we would often talk to them about was the difference between summary and scene. Summary and scene are both very important things to have in your story, but you don't want to overuse either one. You need to have a balance, and you need to know when to use summary and when to use scene to make the story as interesting as possible for your readers and for your audience. Let's take a look at what the Purdue OWL, which is a commonly used writer resource, has to say about using summary versus scene, and then we will take a look at the way that Jamie Lynn uses these concepts and where she could have done better. So we're over here where it says common pitfalls for beginning writers, and since Jamie Lynn is a beginner at writing a book. She's written songs and things like that before, but because she's a beginner at book writing, I think that she did kind of fall into some of these common pitfalls. It says many of the issues with which beginning poets struggle will also apply to beginning fiction writers. However, students writing fiction will also struggle with some craft issues specific to their genre. Beginning fiction writers tend to do more telling than showing, meaning more summary than scene, struggle with the scope of their story, fall back on stereotypical characters, and employ overly dramatic action movie plots. Now, this is specifically talking about fiction, and this book is a memoir, meaning it is nonfiction. However, when it comes to the narrative structure and the storytelling of it, a lot of the same things apply as they do in fiction. Beginning fiction writers will still be learning how to differentiate scene from summary and when to use each. Their stories may not yet have clear distinctions between one scene and the next, or their story may be one long summary. It is often helpful to reinforce the differences between summary and scene during the tutorial, especially if the student's story has a great deal of summary. So here's how we know how to differentiate. A scene takes place in real time, like a movie, usually contains dialogue between characters, and should be used for important interactions and events. We've all heard the phrase set the scene. So we want to set that scene, we want to have some visual descriptions, we want to know which specific people or which specific characters are in that scene, we want to hear the dialogue and have clear descriptions of the actions that are going on. Whereas if we are to summarize that scene, it's going to be more of an overview. Think about having an establishing shot in a movie where you see the vast expanse versus a close-up on a person or a close-up on a building or something like that. We often want to start with a wider scope and then move inward. So we might start with a summary of overall events and then move into scene. So by contrast, here is how we would describe summary. Moves quickly, giving the reader important highlights or or reminders and is used for background information. Bits of summary often occur within scenes. Most of us have heard the old adage, show don't tell. In order to become involved in a piece of prose, a reader must be able to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell things throughout the story. Is the setting painted clearly and vividly? Are the characters described well? Showing is especially important when writing scenes. If anyone finds this particular writing source helpful, this is the Purdue Owl. I will link it in the description below. I think it's a really helpful writing source, and when I have worked as a writing tutor and things like that in the past, I've always come back to this source to give writers examples of how they can work on improving their writing. So now let's take a look throughout Jamie Lynn's book and see where she used summary when she should have used scene, and how we can use that for this stage of developmental editing. So the first example I really saw was, I believe, on page 3. Jamie Lynn is talking about her childhood and her upbringing and what that was like, and she has this long paragraph where she says, "Mama cared for me while my brother and sister went to school. I remember a lot of meals around the table and a lot of happy times when I was young. I was passed around a lot and doted on by everyone. I spoke early and entertained my family with my babbling, and my parents say my theatrical nature showed itself early. I chattered about anything, made funny faces, and was entertaining from toddlerhood onward. I had endless amounts of energy and ran around singing and dancing." The problem with this paragraph is that it's incredibly boring, and the reason it's boring is that there's no scene here. This is a piece of Jamie Lynn describing her childhood as a whole, and she just gives us a brief overview of, like, I was making goofy faces, I sang and I danced. Like, does she have a specific story? Does she have, like, something her mom could tell her about, like, Mama tells a story about a time that I made this goofy face and she had this witty remark to respond with and everyone in the room laughed and then this happened? And if not, if there really isn't a scene we can build out from this, then this paragraph doesn't really need to exist. I'm not sure what it adds as a whole to the story other than to summarize Jamie Lynn's entire childhood, when that's not really that relevant to the overall story that we're going to have here. The next place I saw this was on page 5. She's still continuing to give an overview of her childhood, again without inserting any real scene. She says, "We were a typical family who spent hours amusing ourselves with silly challenges and one-upping each other in fun. The fame and money came later, but it wasn't like that when I was young. As a young girl, I never thought about how much money we had or worried about whether we had enough. My siblings and I didn't suffer, but looking back, I can see the instability in our lives led to periods of financial difficulties. Somehow we always had what we needed, but I knew better than to ask for anything expensive. I learned that lesson early on." She kind of starts to go into a scene, like it seems like she's almost got it, where she says, "Mama and her friend took me shopping. Mama's card didn't go through at Limited Too, and her friend had to pay for my clothes. The concern in Mama's eyes belied her reassurances that everything was fine. To this day, I can still remember the sting of humiliation." So she starts to get into a specific scene there, but if this is a key moment in her discussing her financial struggles growing up, I would say that she really needs to draw that out a little more. She talks about the sting of humiliation, so she starts to get a little bit into her emotions and what she's feeling, but build this out with some dialogue. Within the art of memoir, it's kind of understood that dialogue isn't going to be exact because none of us have a perfect memory, so even if she had to fudge the dialogue a little bit, no one's going to get mad that the dialogue isn't exactly what happened because nobody has that exact memory, right? The idea is that this is memoir, this isn't journalism. So if she's building out the scene, she could say, "I went shopping, I was so excited to get this new outfit, and I saw the outfit, describe what the outfit looks like. I remember feeling this huge wanting. I visualized myself and how great I was going to look in it. And then I remember seeing Mama looking so hopeful as she said, 'Jamie Lynn, you look great in that outfit.' And I remember feeling that I was going to get this little burst of confidence for the first time. And then when we brought it up to the counter and Mama's card declined, I felt the air suck out of the room. Mama said, 'No, I thought that this card had enough on it,' or something." Like, just build it out as a scene, build up the tension instead of this brief summary in the midst of other summary. Again, it's really boring to read. It doesn't do much for the reader. Right after this story, she immediately, with no transition, moves into another summary where she says, "My daddy was well known for developing businesses and was good at every job he took on. He worked in construction and welding. He also had a seafood restaurant called Granny's, known for crawfish and shrimp. At some point, he gave it to Brian, who eventually sold it. Daddy even opened the first gym in our area, and it was a big hit. I remember my sister taught classes there too. Eventually, big business came to Louisiana, and the gym closed." That was all over the place, right? Like, that was just a massive summary of, like, I don't know, decades of time? How much time passed there? Jamie Lynn was talking about being a child in the previous paragraph and her mom getting her credit card declined at limited 2. And then the very next paragraph, it's like, so daddy owned a seafood restaurant, he owned a gym, he owned this thing. It's like, okay, did he own all these things at once? If Brittney was teaching classes there, was she teaching classes there as a teenager when Jamie Lynn was still a child? Are we still in her childhood here? Or is this at an older age? When did this happen? It was just a little bit like, I can't picture this in space and time, and if your dad's businesses were an influential part on your childhood, why not give a little more detail about them, or why not, even better yet, weave them in chronologically? So if you're telling the story about the time your mom's credit card declined at limited 2, you could then weave in and say something like, at this time, daddy had a job where he was owning a grocery store, and then she could go a little bit into the grocery store and maybe how the grocery store wasn't doing well, and that's why her family didn't have a lot of money, and what that was like or something. That way we could kind of see how this all fits in together. Instead, it's just like 2 summaries of things that she doesn't even really try to relate. On page 19, she's talking about her audition for All That, and I will say, I loved the show All That. I loved the original one that had Keenan and Kel on it and all of them, and then when they took that hiatus for a year and came back, and then Jamie Lynn was in the cast, I liked that version too. I actually really liked Jamie Lynn as an actress when I was a kid. I enjoyed watching Zoe 101, although I thought Zoe was a little bit of a Mary Sue, but regardless, I still enjoyed the show. So I thought it would be cool, you know, I'm a kid who loved Nickelodeon stuff, and I still love Nickelodeon stuff, so I thought it would be really cool to see what it was like behind the scenes. What were the details? What was going on? How did people talk to each other? But again, Jamie Lynn falls back on summary so much, just giving a very basic overview and then doesn't go into detail. This is page 21. She says, I went into the studios to an audition room where several executives observed and made the final decision on hiring me. I was so nervous, but as soon as I got into character, the pure fun of it took over. They would throw lines at me, and I would ad-lib in a way that showcased my abilities. Once I was finished, they said, we'll be in touch soon. I went home and waited for the call. It didn't take more than a couple of days. Hearing I was hired was one of the coolest moments of my life. I was so excited. Okay, if you were so excited, we went through a whole range of emotions there, from being so nervous to being so excited, yet we brought out none of those emotions. You didn't make the reader feel any of those emotions along with you. So she's in the audition room. She's talking about several executives. What did the room look like? Were you standing in the middle of the room and then a bunch of executives were watching you? Was it like adult men in suits and you're here, this little girl feeling intimidated by all of these adults making a decision about your career? What did that feel like? What did the nervousness feel like? You felt butterflies in your stomach? Is that what you felt? Did you feel a lump in your throat? Did you start to stumble over your words at first, but then start to get into character, and then like once the rhythm of it took over, like when you say I would ad-lib showcase my abilities, what did you say? I imagine you still have access to your audition tape, so even if you don't remember, you could probably look at it, right? Like, what did you say? What were some of the jokes that you made? Do you remember a specific moment where you broke through the nerves because you heard one of the executives watching you break down laughing at a funny joke that you said and you realized, I've got this, and then you got into the rhythm of it? Did you have a moment like that? Like, what did the audition go like? And then when you were waiting for the call, did the nervousness come back? Did you feel like a buzz of anticipation inside? Did you wait by the phone? Like, what did that nervousness feel like? Then when the call came, what was the physiological reaction inside to that emotion that you felt when you felt that excitement? Did you celebrate with your family? Did you get off the phone and go, oh my God, I did it? Like, what happened? These seem to be such pivotal and crucial moments, and we're getting so little information. On page 26, she has this whole like summary that feels like it was meant to fill a word count. I don't know if she was just writing this just to fill pages. So she's like, the list of musicians included about every popular band or singer in the 90s. Destiny's Child, LL Cool J, Usher, the Spice Girls, the Backstreet Boys. We had an elaborate green room that appeared on screen for all the viewers where the cast and guests would hang out. All that was a 4-camera shot show, which allowed us to rehearse Monday through Wednesday and shoot live on Thursday and Friday. The week would start with a table read where writers would take notes and make changes. After the meeting, rehearsals would start. If I wasn't rehearsing, I'd have costume fittings, hair and makeup sessions to help create the characters I'd be playing. By the time we started filming, we were all pumped to get into costume and perform in front of the live audience. The level of adrenaline was palpable on those days. As an ensemble, not everyone is in every skit. When we weren't on screen, the cast hung out in the green room with the guest performers. We'd get to see everyone perform, meet the musicians, and have fun. What was the point of that? Like, you just described what a day of filming, like, that was just an overview. You would have fun doing what? Like, the level of adrenaline was palpable. What does that mean? What did that feel like? Like, this is so vague, and it just feels like, here's some more words to fill the word count. Let me just give you an overview. Similar problem on page 43 when she says, I was missing home more than ever. My friends and my boyfriend Casper were back home in Louisiana having experiences I felt like I was missing out on. Having what experiences? Like going to school? Doing activities, playing outside, playing sports, like having experiences. You couldn't have made it any more vague than that. On page 71, she's starting to talk about her and Brittney's relationship, especially during her teenage years, during Jamie Lynn's teenage years where Brittney would have been in her 20s. She says, when it was just the two of us, we were a couple of typical girls hanging out and enjoying our sisterly bond. But outside of that, it was difficult to make sense of Brittney's world, and I started to feel different about staying at her house. I became very uncomfortable there. Brittney tried to reassure me that everything was fine, and as the little sister, I believed her. After a few days together, she persuaded me to get back to work. The whole scene made me uncomfortable, and I just wanted out of there. What scene? You started to feel different. I started to feel different because of what? She felt uncomfortable doing what? What was the purpose of this? You felt uncomfortable around Brittney. Why? This feels like she's saying this to demonize Brittney, and we'll get into a little bit how Jamie Lynn is not super kind to Brittney in this book, and it really bothers me. But this alone, like, all I include from this is that she wants to shit talk Brittney by being like, Brittney made me uncomfortable, but then giving no details whatsoever. In what way am I supposed to believe you if you just said the scene made me uncomfortable? The scene? What scene? You're just talking about staying at Brittney's house. What? I'm so confused. On page 74, I think she does actually get into a decent scene for the first time. And this is when she talks about finding out that she had gotten pregnant unintentionally. I thought that this was like the first and one of the only examples of scene in this book where Jamie Lynn really was able to bring out the descriptions, bring out the emotions, and capture the reader. She's talking about getting a pregnancy test. She says, the minute I got my hands on the test, I swear I thought I was going to puke. Between my racing heart and turbulent thoughts, it became difficult to focus on my driving. Out of desperation, we pulled into the BP gas station off Veterans Boulevard, knowing it had a single stall bathroom, no keys, no questions, and no interruptions. Jess locked the door, and I did what girls in my situation do: sit, stick, and wait. There's a universal truth about time. It speeds up in the good moments and crawls during times of anticipation. Those few minutes in the bathroom really felt like an eternity. I felt like I was in some weird vortex. A series of thoughts were popping up like bubbles off a wand. What if? Oh shit, what are my parents going to say? My daddy's going to kill him. What's going to happen to my career? I've always been the good girl. A baby? Could I be a mom? I'm going to lose everything I worked hard for, but a baby! In an attempt to staunch the flow of thoughts, I focused on the cracks in the floor, the fluorescent lighting, and the muted voices from outside. Dude! She's capable of it! That's a scene! Jamie, that's a scene! You wrote a scene! That's a scene! She talks about her racing heart. She talks about feeling nauseous, like she was gonna puke. She tells us specifically the thoughts that were popping into her head. That's kind of some internal dialogue she has with herself. She talks about time slowing down and how she heard the muted voices outside the bathroom and focused on the cracks in the ceiling and all of that. Jamie! You can do it! Why didn't you write other scenes in the book? This is more of this. If I were the developmental editor for this book, I would have said, what you did here, you need to do in all of these other pages as well. Take this and do that there. Do that there too. Take out some of this word count filler summarization stuff. Use that space instead to bring out and expand on those scenes because you're capable of it. She has one more excellent example of a scene in this book. That's where she talks about her daughter getting into an ATV accident. So this is when Jamie's an adult and her daughter's a couple years old, and her daughter goes on a little ATV ride with the family around, and then she gets into an accident where she falls into a pond, I believe. And she had to be rushed to the hospital. She almost died. It was this terrifying moment for Jamie Lynn, and she actually does bring out the scene here. She says, Maddie was into her final loop and we watched from our position across the pond. One moment we were sharing in Maddie's fun, and the next, life as we knew it came to a screeching halt. We saw the side-by-side make a hard left turn, which caused it to flip off the embankment, and then we saw Maddie disappear beneath the water. I cocked my head to the side in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Instinctively, we ran to the water to get Maddie. I heard disembodied screaming, and I realized it was mine. Jamie, that's her husband who's also named Jamie. Jamie was just ahead of me in the water, making his way to my baby. Instinctively, I ran after him. In her quick thinking, Miss Holly called 911. My only thought was, get to her! My brain shifted into autopilot, and I moved as quickly as I could. I screamed, oh, my baby, oh, baby, Mama's coming. Jamie, get to her! God, please save my baby! Within a minute, Jamie finally got to her, and I was right behind him. We clamored to pull her from under the water. I can feel her arm. She's not moving. Jamie, she's stuck. We gotta get this thing off her now. I gulped air and dove under, trying to free her. I started to think, this is taking too long. Oh, baby, Mama's trying. Jamie and his dad were straining to dislodge the ATV, but it wouldn't budge. Guys, please don't take her. Maddie, Mama's here. That's a scene, dude! You can do it! I was reading this and I felt like myself getting invested. I'm like, holy shit, I'm scared for this little girl. I could feel Jamie Lynn's fear watching her daughter go through a life-threatening accident. I felt the fear that she had as a mom. I felt the way that she felt herself like go outside her body. She did a scene here. She can do it. This and the pregnancy story are the only two times she has like a legitimate scene in this book. And I'm like, if you're capable of it, it's just lazy not to do it, and it's lazy of your editor not to ask you to go back and add more to this. So those were the overall areas where I thought Jamie Lynn really needed a lot more scenes, details, specifics to really bring out the story. Next, we're going to talk about the way that Jamie Lynn is very bad at using a reflective voice in this story to really create what would make a substantial memoir, for lack of a better word. And I'll go into what I mean by this in a moment. So the biggest problem with this book is that Jamie Lynn, I won't say sees herself as the main character, because it's a memoir. She is the main character of this book. But she sees herself as the hero in every situation. In real life, none of us are heroes. And if you're going to write a memoir talking about all of this, it's important to know when those times are and to know how you've grown from those in a way that your reader can take something away from it. And I'm not sure Jamie Lynn is self-aware enough to write this book or to do an effective memoir yet. Because in every situation, she always comes back to being the victim and being the good guy and being the hero. She never admits that she was at fault or that she's the one who's wrong or that she had to learn and change something. Over here we have a literary journal called Brevity, which is all about memoir and the craft of writing memoir. This is a publication. It's an online publication, and we would often read it when I was in my master's program. I took a class on memoir writing, and this was one of the resources that we regularly used. And I have talked about this article before, Innocence and Experience, Voice and Creative Nonfiction. This is actually an article from 2005, so it's been around for a while. And you guys might remember that I talked about this article when I reviewed Girl Stop Apologizing a couple years ago, because I talked about how Rachel Hollis didn't have a great job using a voice of experience, because when she talked about her childhood, she still saw herself as the one in the right all the time and things like that. So this is a consistent problem that Jamie Lynn has throughout the book. We're going to point out some specific instances, but first let's talk about these different voices that we have to weave together in creative nonfiction. When I was studying fiction for my MFA degree, one of my teachers told me that voice is everything. As true as this is in fiction, it's equally true in nonfiction. Even though I'm telling my own personal story, the voice I use isn't my everyday speaking voice. In fact, my observation, both from writing and reading essays and memoirs, is that most writers employ two major voices in their work. I've defined these voices by reimagining phrases originated by William Blake, labeling one a song or voice of innocence and the other a song or voice of experience. The song or voice of innocence relates the facts of the experience, the surface subject. It's the voice that, in effect, says, first this happened, and then this happened. It reveals the sequence of events, the particulars of your experience, whether in a one-page essay or a full-length book. It's the innocent you, who you were when the events actually occurred. The voice of experience is then twined to this voice of innocence, thus adding a more mature author persona. The second narrator establishes the progression of thought in creative nonfiction, allowing the reader to know what the voice of innocence, what the facts mean. By use of irony and metaphor, it interprets the surface subject. This voice, in effect, reflects back on the story, the past, and guides the reader through the maze of the experience. In Terror Father, a simplified example of a voice of experience sentence could be, because my father misloved me, I had no sense of my true self growing up, no language to understand what happened to me. This reflective narrator would then proceed to develop this identity and language into a metaphor and theme for the entire memoir. So basically the overall idea here is that when you're writing a memoir, you are going to be writing in your voice of what it was like when it actually happened. You're recalling events and you want to take on that voice, but you have to also blend together with that the voice of how you feel about it now in retrospect. reflect. So the example I gave when we talked about Girl Stop Apologizing was, there's the scene where Rachel Hollis is getting mad when she's 11 years old because it's her birthday and her mom makes her a boxed cake, and her family's poor, she's in a rundown apartment, she feels like ashamed being around her friends with this cake that she doesn't like, and the apartment looks like shit, and it's making her feel awful. The voice of experience would then come in and reflect on that and talk about, as a mother myself now, I've come to see that my mom was doing the best she could and that these were difficult circumstances, but at the time that nagging feeling of humiliation took over me. But she doesn't have anything like that. All she says is, I remember feeling awful about this and decided I'd be rich one day, and then she becomes rich. And it really doesn't feel like she had any level of reflection. Jamie Lynn has the exact same problem in this book, except it's way worse. In this section of our developmental edits, I'm also going to talk about her having some contradictions and having a general lack of self-awareness. For example, on page 16, she says, "The dream of being a performer was always mine, and in no way did I feel my parents were living vicariously through me. I practiced diligently and relished receiving accolades from everyone. Singing was only part of what I loved about performing. My sister's voice was throaty and strong, while mine was fluid and controlled. People said we were different, but equally as talented. But my true love was acting." This comes across very arrogant. It seems like she's very full of herself here. I'm not a fan of the way she phrased this, but we also need to keep this little section in mind because we're going to keep returning to it where later things she says completely contradict this. On page 22, Lynn has a repeated problem of showing no sense of self-reflection or growth when it comes to her negligence in taking care of animals. And you guys know I'm a rescue dog advocate. My dog Chewy's my baby. I run a small business that creates children's books and plushies based on rescue dogs and donates to animal shelters. So being a good pet parent is something that is really important to me. But this is what Jamie Lynn says first on page 22. She's talking about how she has a dog, Izzy, at the time, and she says, "We would shuttle back and forth between California and Louisiana as much as the schedule would allow. Unfortunately, the constant travel and demands of my time made it impossible to care for Izzy. And sometimes I had to give her away. Sometimes I would get to take care of one of BRITNEY's dogs when I was missing having one of my own." That's all she says there. And I'm like, first of all, we have the same problem as we just talked about before. There's no scene here. Having to give your dog away, from my experience, is emotionally devastating. If you have to give your dog away and you have to come to that conclusion that you're not the right person to take care of this dog, that's generally a pretty emotionally devastating thing to happen. That's generally not a thing you want to happen. Like, did she feel any emotion here? Or was the way she tells this is so flippant. It's like, I had to give the dog away, but sometimes I got to hang out with this other, like, did you love this dog? Jamie Lynn, what? And then there's no level of reflection of like, oh, looking back, I probably shouldn't have adopted a dog when I didn't have the time or ability to care for her, but we'll see that she hasn't learned this lesson because on page 42, she has the exact same problem. "I got another dog from someone on our set. Dogs gave me unconditional love and attention that provided comfort and a reminder of home. Allie was a Yorkie poo and was by far the worst behaved dog I ever had. She was a terror, running away and creating havoc. With my hectic schedule, I didn't have the time to give Allie the training and attention she needed. Eventually, I had to give her away too." Why did you get a dog if you couldn't take care of her? It seems like, again, like she's blaming the dog. Like, the dog was really badly behaved. She messed everything up. And it's like, okay, where's the voice of experience? Where's the reflection here? Where's the realizing that at the time I was a kid and my emotions wanted me to blame the dog, but as an adult, I realized that if I didn't have the ability to train her, that was on me. And where's that? Where's the growth here? The problem is, I don't think she has grown from this. Because recently I saw this video of her talking to Elon Musk. I'll just show it to you guys.
Somebody's got to let Elon Musk know that the Tesla is a secret cat killer and it's a problem that we really got to fix. We have now lost, I don't even want to tell you how many cats because they don't hear the Tesla crank and unfortunate things happen, and it's really devastating and tragic for everyone involved. So since the Tesla is so quiet, maybe he could like make one of those noises that like bother cat or animal ears when it cranks up, so that way they know something's happening and they aren't caught off guard and things don't end in a very tragic way. So, you know, Elon Musk, let's figure this out. I mean, you owe me a couple cats.
So yeah, I think Jamie Lynn Spears is probably one of the worst pet parents I've ever seen. This woman should not be allowed near animals. So the way she flippantly writes about, I got a dog, I had to give her away. I got a dog, I had to give her away. It's like sickening to me. I can't handle that. Another place where I thought there was a general lack of self-awareness and lack of reflection was on page 28. When she first mentions Dan Schneider, she says, producer and writer Dan Schneider, who'd created all that, recognized my talent. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into Dan Schneider here, but recently Hulu put out this documentary about Nickelodeon called The Orange Years, which I watched. I loved it. I thought it was great. Dan Schneider was never mentioned. They didn't mention his name. They didn't bring him on once. There's a reason for that. Dan Schneider has a lot of very bad accusations against him right now. And I don't want to get demonetized, so I'm not going to go too deep into what those are. But Jamie Lynn is very cool with saying his name. On page 34, she says his name again in a certain way. And this becomes especially not self-aware when you take into account on page 211, she says, no one knows better than my sister how calculating the press can be, how everything she says is spun and revised to suit a purpose. In our world, words matter and should be used purposefully. So Jamie Lynn says that she uses all her words purposefully because the press is going to spin it. Jamie Lynn, then why did you say this on page 34? The creator and director, Dan Schneider, was exacting and insisted on professionalism. He knew how to get just what he needed from a rambunctious group of teens. I'm sorry, can we again say Dan Schneider knew how to get just what he needed from a group of teens? Jamie Lynn, if you're careful with your words, why the fuck did you say that? What? Phrasing, my dude! Phrasing! On pages 36 and 37, Jamie Lynn talks about her sort of feud with Alexa Nicholas, who was one of her fellow cast members on Zoe 101. She accuses Alexa of bullying her. Alexa has spoken out in many interviews saying that Jamie Lynn actually bullied her on set all the time. I wasn't there on the set, but it's a little weird how she shit talks her so much and talks about how she was like starting all these rumors. Later, Jamie says, for years I took the high road and ignored the story. Like, categorizing yourself as I took the high road, again, shows a lack of reflection. When many of us are kids, we do things that later we regret and we learn from. So to be like, I took the high road is just very self-important. Based on everything that went on and being 13, we both felt justified in our actions. Looking back, I think that all these are normal childhood challenges, but in a working environment with parents and producers involved, the drama of these events intensified. So I think that's a fair conclusion that, like, when you're a kid and you're put into these adult situations, you don't always act rationally. But again, why not use this as a moment for her to have reflection and instead of saying, I took the high road? And also, if this is just, oh, we were just 13 and we were immature, why are you bringing it up again now? Why are you making a whole drama out of it again now if this was just dumb teenage drama? A complete lack of self-awareness happens on page 37 as well, where she says, I adored all the boys on the show and many others in the cast. The boys were much easier to be around at that time for me. So this is a hashtag not like other girls moment. You know how in high school there was always that girl who was like, all my friends are guys because girls are so dramatic. They're so much easier to get along with because girls are too much drama for me. And 100% of the time that was the girl that was always starting the drama. Girls as a whole being too much drama for you, probably, if you're the thing in common with all the drama at that point, you know what I'm saying? So I was like, this is just a not like other girls moment. Why didn't she look back and say, I later realized my internalized misogyny? Because she didn't. She didn't learn anything. On page 59, she also has a story that I'm not sure what she was trying to say by it other than potentially to shit talk Britney. She talks about their friend Jason that Britney was hanging out with when Britney was in her 20s, I think. It says he was often up to no good and everyone knew he was bad news, but Britney was not thinking about any of that. She and Brian didn't return until the following morning looking like they had been up all night. The car was a mess inside. All kinds of garbage bottles and even a razor blade littered the back seat. Horrified, Mama wanted no part of that car, but it was Christmas and we were all going to smile. And then it stops there. We never learn anything else about Christmas or how the family's Christmas was spent that year. And also, what was the point of this story? Britney had a messy car. And when you as an adult are reflecting on the story, what did this story mean for you? How is this important? It really just sounds like she's trying to be like, see, Britney was a fucking mess. It sounds like she's trying to shit talk her. That's what it sounds like to me. I don't know what the purpose of this story is otherwise. She also regularly throughout this book talks about OCD, but is very flippant about it. I have OCD. It almost ruined my life. I have to take medication for it. That's fucked a lot of things up for me. And so I'm a little bit like on edge when people just are like, yeah, I have OCD, who cares? It's like, I understand that there's going to be a different solution for everyone. Some people, cognitive behavioral therapy is the solution. For some people, medication's the solution, whatever. But the way she talks about it here is I'm not a fan of. So she says on page 117, at the time, I was a self-diagnosed obsessive compulsive. I had never considered it a disorder because the manifestations of it made my life better, and Maddie benefited from it too. So she's basically like, I had OCD, but it made me a better mom because I kept the house nice or whatever, or like I was obsessed with taking care of her. Like, I don't like that. I don't like when people glorify OCD. She does later get formally diagnosed with it, so it's not like she's making up that she has it. She does get formally diagnosed later. But I don't like when people are like, so as it turns out, I was very functional with this disorder, so it turns out I just didn't need to do anything because it made my life better, because that line of thinking caused me and causes many others to put off getting treatment for so long, thinking, but what if I'm just better with my mental illness? I don't like that at all. Page 188 is where she glorifies OCD again. We keep an extensive, detailed weekly calendar for the entire family, so we know where everyone is. I make sure to include pickup times and carpool drivers' names. Phone numbers are listed for professionals and friends. There's a small book for medications and dosages. Can you see that I have a tendency to plan for all eventualities? My husband will tell you that I am a functioning obsessive compulsive. He's right. Again, I don't like, oh, my mental illness just makes me better. Like, no, I hate that. I hate that so much. Page 126 to 127. The fact that she doesn't have a separate voice of experience moment here, and the fact that she doesn't show any self-reflection, makes me think that all the stuff she's been saying in interviews about she wanted to end Britney's conservatorship too, it makes it seem like all of that's a lie, because the way she characterizes everything here lacks so much reflection that the only conclusion I can draw from this is that she hasn't learned anything. On page 126, she says, Daddy, who had stepped up to help Britney during her difficulties in the past couple years, was on the tour too. He helped get rid of the extortionists and conspirators in her life and had even committed to his sobriety in support of Britney. The conservatorship was just a small piece of his commitment to helping her. They stayed sober together, and seeing my father put Britney's needs ahead of his own desires helped my old resentments fade. For a period of time, the conservatorship mandated Britney be drug and alcohol tested on a regular basis. My father volunteered to do it with her in solidarity. Now, if there's a moment where Jamie Lynn's like, I thought that this, as a teenager, I thought that this was great, but looking back, I see the issue. No, she just still frames this as her dad being in the right. Here's some issues with this. The entire book up to this point, Jamie Lynn had categorized her father, who's also named Jamie. Her name's Jamie, her father's name's Jamie, and her husband's name's Jamie. It's a little strange. But anyway, characterizes her father as this alcoholic. He wasn't there for the family. He neglected them. He left them in terrible situations. His alcoholism caused him to be violent. It caused all this. She has all these discussions about how his alcoholism was ruining their life. And then in this moment, she's acting like he's being a good person by keeping Britney safe in the conservatorship. First of all, what in Jamie's rationale, what is making her think that the father would be a good conservator for Britney, who needs to stay sober according to this, when he's been an alcoholic his whole life? Why did she think he would be a good fit for that? And in interviews, she said, like, oh, I didn't necessarily think he'd be a good fit for it. The court decided that. Like, I don't care. You're writing this book now. You have the opportunity. You said this is your opportunity to tell your story. What do you feel about this? Why do you think, like, why are you characterizing this as him doing a good thing? For those of you who don't know about Britney's conservatorship, it was a violation of her human rights. To force an adult woman to not be able to drink alcohol or do any drugs, to forcibly put an adult woman on birth control and not allow her to have children, to forcibly keep her working. I'll link some videos below that go into details about what happened to Britney in the conservatorship, because this woman was violated. For 12 to 13 years, she was treated as an object. She was owned by other people. She did not have the right to her own body. She was forcibly put on medications and forcibly put on birth controls, and she was forcibly treated in a certain way. She didn't have her own right to her own life. And I can't believe that's legal. I can't believe in a country, in the US, that what happened to her was legally allowed to happen. Their father should be in jail for what they did, for life. I cannot believe, and I just cannot believe Jamie Lynn, who has said in interviews, I wanted Britney free from the conservatorship too. I wanted her to be happy. Here, I have proof. how could she frame this way? Her experience has been, and it has been in this book as well, at the time I was a teenager, I didn't know any better, I just kind of followed what was going on. Then where's the reflection? Where's the voice of experience? Where are you to tell us that you now realize this is wrong? Instead, she just says, the conservatorship was a small piece of his commitment to helping her. She portrays this positively, like the dad was the good guy here. And talking about her father volunteering to do the drug and alcohol testing, this is a lifelong alcoholic who was abusive because of his alcoholism. And now he gets to volunteer? Where's the reflection about how the fact that Brittany doesn't get to volunteer to be sober, but the father, who has been an alcoholic and ruined people's lives with it, he gets to volunteer. He gets the credit for doing it, where she's forced by law to do this in violation of her own right to her body. The only conclusion we can draw from this is that Jamie Lynn still stands by this now. This is disgusting. On page 141, she starts talking about her stint into being a country singer and her brief music career. Again, she puts herself as the hero and the victim in this situation and is never the bad guy. The period of self-discovery I spent in Tennessee culminated with me taking back my power and doing things on my own terms. I returned to Nashville and let the bulk of the production team go. We all knew it wasn't working. Everyone agreed I had the talent, and I was determined to use that talent in the most authentic way. So we're just gonna ignore the fact that you just fired a bunch of people? Like, you employed a bunch of people, you fired a bunch of people, and your conclusion from that was, I had the talent, but they just weren't working for me. Only with that control would I be able to have the career I craved. I'd spent years being shaped, directed, molded, and controlled. Okay, but wait. On page 16, remember, she said, the dream of being a performer was always mine, and in no way did I feel my parents were living vicariously through me. She spent so much time being defensive and justifying how her parents never did anything wrong. She wanted this life. She wanted to be a performer, but then later is like, I've been controlled by everyone else this whole time. There's a major contradiction there, and also this is a clear place where you can relate to Brittany, right? If you feel like you're being controlled, she was legally controlled. She had legally the majority of her human rights taken away from her for over a decade. Isn't that something that you could draw a comparison? Is that just, has it not resonated with her that those are similar experiences yet? Jamie, what? Chapter 13 of this is called My Testimony, and this is the chapter where Jamie Lynn is talking about how she thinks she did nothing wrong and did nothing to ruin Brittany's life. From the earliest days of Brittany's challenges, I protected her at every turn. Too young to know better, to understand that it's okay if you're not okay. I helped keep Brittany's emotional episodes hidden from the world. So Jamie's like, I was too young to understand. I was too young to understand what was going on with this conservatorship. Jamie, it went on for like 12 years. It was, Jamie, I think, was like 17 when it started and was 29 or 30 when it ended. During none of Jamie Lynn's decade of her 20s, did she realize she was too young to know better? Why didn't she fight for her then? She says she did, but the way she characterizes it in this book, I don't believe her. And then on page 210, she says, I was permitted to follow my own dreams as long as they were in line with hers, and by hers she means Brittany's. My aim was to try and be a good girl, and that left me vulnerable to my parents' machinations. Jamie, you specifically said multiple times throughout this book that your parents never pressured you and that this dream was always yours and yours alone, and that you got these jobs without Brittany's help. This was all you, and you were never handed anything. She talks about that throughout the book, but then over here contradicts it. This is the problem with having this main character syndrome and always seeing yourself as the good guy. A lot of times there's contradictions. And Jamie, you have to square those with the reader. The reader who reads this book is going to be very confused what to actually take away from this. So after the developmental editing stage of a book, which is what we just did, I would give all of these notes to Jamie Lynn, and then she would have to go and write a new draft of the book incorporating my changes. She would then bring the new draft back to me, and we would go into the copy editing and line editing, proofreading, and formatting stages of the book. So we are now going to move into the copy editing stages, where I am going to do a copy edit on this book. This is the stage of editing where we're going to look at the sentence structure, the wording, the overall grammar, things like that. We can also look at, punctuation and spelling, although generally there will also be an additional proofreading stage afterwards where you could catch any final typos and things like that, but we can look at all of that in this stage as well. When I was in grad school, I took a class about copy editing, and the way they told us to remember what specific things to focus on during the copy editing stage of publication is with the 4 C's, and those stand for clarity, coherence, correctness, and consistency. Basically, that means that in this stage, we want to focus on, are any things confusing? Are there any sentences we need to reword so that the meaning is clear to the reader? Are there any blatant grammatical mistakes that we need to fix? Are there any pieces that seem like they don't belong or that make the sentence a little bit unclear or incoherent? So with all that in mind, let's give this book a copy edit. So for line editing and copy editing, we're going to start on page 2 where I see the first big mistake of this, and that mistake that we're going to talk about is a misplaced modifier. I've talked about misplaced modifiers doing a little English teacher bit when I did my review of Dave Hollis's second book called Built Through Courage. I talked about misplaced modifiers, but basically what they are, a phrase or clause within a sentence that modifies something else in that sentence, and there are times when we'll write a sentence where that modifying phrase will be attached to the wrong thing. I'll show you what I mean with this example. On page 2, Jamie Lynn is talking about how she was a surprise baby for her mom. And she says, at first she thought she was seriously ill, but after being examined, the doctor confirmed she was in fact pregnant. So the modifier here is the phrase, but after being examined. So who was examined in this case? The mom. Jamie Lynn's mom was examined by the doctor to find out that she was pregnant. But that's not what this sentence says. It says, after being examined, the doctor confirmed. So it's sounding like the doctor was the one who was examined, not the mom. This sentence technically is saying that the doctor examined himself, which doesn't make any sense, and that's why this sentence is incorrect, and Jamie Lynn needs to rewrite it. I would have thought an editor would have caught that, but the sentence should say something more like, at first she thought she was seriously ill, but after being examined, she learned that she was actually pregnant. Or, if you want to keep the doctor as the subject of that clause, you could say, at first she thought she was seriously ill, but after the doctor examined my mom, he then confirmed that she was pregnant, or something like that. We have another misplaced modifier here on page 21. Jamie Lynn is talking about her time on All That and what filming was like, and she says, when filming, time evaporates quickly. So when filming is the modifier there, who's filming? Jamie Lynn is filming, the cast is filming, the crew is filming. Time, which is the subject of that sentence, is not filming anything. So right now it makes it sound like the abstract concept of time is what is filming this show. That's what this sentence is technically conveying. That's not correct. It should say something like, when filming, we felt time evaporate quickly. When the cast and crew were filming the show, we felt time passing quickly, or time evaporating, or something like that. When filming, time evaporates quickly is not correct. The very next sentence, she has another misplaced modifier on the same page where she says, with my own growing fame, security had to be considered. So with my own growing fame, who has the growing fame? Jamie. With my own growing fame, I had to consider hiring security. That's what she should have said. With my own growing fame, it makes it sound like the security has Jamie Lynn's growing fame. That doesn't make sense. Last week, when I reviewed Ben Shapiro's book, The Authoritarian Moment, we talked about what passive participle verb phrases are. Those are verb phrases that are written in passive voice and can sometimes eliminate the implied subject of the sentence. So on page 22, she says, the lines of parenting were blurred by the demands of our jobs and decisions had to be made for both my sister and me. So both clauses in that sentence have passive participle verb phrases. The verbs are not active in either of those. So she says the lines of parenting were blurred. Were blurred is a passive participle verb phrase because the lines of parenting is not what's doing the blurring. That's the object of the blurring. What is doing the blurring is the demands of the jobs. So at least the subject was clear in that clause. The second clause, she eliminates the subject. She says, and decisions had to be made for both my sister and me. So had to be made is a passive participle verb phrase, and that's the main verb phrase of the clause. Who is making those decisions, though? That's never stated. Who's making those decisions for them? It sounds like maybe she's trying to hide it. Maybe she's not saying it for a certain reason. But if she's not going to be upfront about what's going on, it feels very manipulative to not have the verb be active. Now, having verbs be passive or writing in passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. However, if you remember when I talked about copy editing, correctness is not the only thing we edit for. We also edit for clarity and coherence and consistency. And I think this very much ruins the clarity of the sentence that we don't have a clear picture of who is making the decisions. On page 67, she uses a passive participle verb phrase again. I mean, she does it a lot throughout this book, but I only pointed out the times where I thought it was particularly egregious. And I know I use them all the time in regular conversation. Again, it's not wrong to use them, but consider the implications in a published work that's been edited when she says the following on page 67. With the support of my parents, Brittany got the help she needed. At the time, the conservatorship was enacted and a restraining restraining order was issued to protect Brittany from Sam. Was enacted, that's a passive participle verb phrase. Was issued. Okay, so who enacted the conservatorship and who issued the restraining order? Why aren't you telling us? Why aren't you telling us who enacted the conservatorship? Is it because you're like trying to protect your father's reputation or something? Because he enacted it, right? So why aren't you saying that? Why are you just saying it was enacted? You intentionally eliminated the subject of that sentence. Or if it was unintentional, it's just another reason. If I were the editor of this book, I would have been like, hey, Jamie Lynn, rewrite this sentence and say, my father enacted the conservatorship. Jesus. On page 107, we have another misplaced modifier when she's talking about, you know, this is when she and the guy she calls Casper, that's not his real name, but he's the biological father of her daughter. And she's talking about, this is like back when they were still together. She says, after years of worrying that the police would knock on my door or worse, his sister called to tell me that Casper had been involved in a car wreck. The modifier is after years of worrying that the police would knock on my door. Then the subject of the independent clause that follows is his sister. So was his sister the one worrying that the police were going to be called? No, Jamie was. She made that clear that she's been worried about the police being called. She's been worried about her boyfriend's drug activity and him getting involved in some shady stuff. She was worried about the police getting called. But it makes it sound like his sister was the one worried about the police getting called. She wasn't the one worried, but that's how this sentence reads. Another misplaced modifier on page 120. Growing up in my house, there had been music playing pretty much 24/7. The concept of there is what was growing up in your house? No, you were growing up in your house. You should say, growing up in my house, I played music pretty much 24/7. I heard music 24/7. Or even make that modifier its own clause instead, and that way you can help clarify that. So you could say, while I was growing up, my parents would play music all the time, or something like that. But to say growing up in my house, there had been, growing up in my house is modifying there. That doesn't make any sense. On page 158, Jamie Lynn once again uses a passive participle verb phrase as the main predicate of her sentence as a way to absolve her guilt in the conservatorship, or at least that's what it feels like. She says, I'm assuming that this, among other things, was what led to the conservatorship that was established in 2008. That was established, that's a passive participle verb phrase, who established it, was what led to the conservatorship that's active, so it wasn't the main predicate, it was the predicate of the independent clause. Sorry. You still need to edit that. On page 214, I was like, girl, if anything, now is the time to be using active verbs. Because she says here, since her testimony, I have been accused and convicted of everything from theft to neglect in the court of public opinion. Jamie, the girls, and I have been threatened. Okay. I have been accused. I have been threatened. If anything, now is the time to use active verb phrases here. Since her testimony, X, Y, and Z accused me of X, Y, and Z. Make this clear. Edit these sentences to make them clear, Jamie Lynn. Overall, I have a hard time believing that an editor really gave it their all on this book. I can't imagine an editor like spent time on this and left it the way it is, riddled with all of the mistakes and all of the poor writing that it has. I give this book 1 star because it's a book where Jamie Lynn plays the victim in the exploitation of her sister. And not only that, but she has no self-awareness about it. And on top of that, the writing isn't even good. The storytelling is boring. She can't set a scene to save her life, except in the 2 places where she does set a scene, but then is too lazy to do it throughout the rest of the book. Overall, 1 star. Do not buy this book. It absolutely sucks. I don't recommend it. But I hope that at the very least, it was a useful tool for you guys to learn about some concepts when you're editing your own work, or if you're trying to write a memoir yourself, how to make some of your own writing better. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much again to Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's video, and thank you again to my Patreon supporters for supporting me on this channel. I will see you guys again Monday morning on Your Morning Guru, and I will see you guys again Friday on this channel for another video. But in the meantime, please don't forget to support small businesses, and have a fantastic Friday. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.